I'm Roxanne Carter, and this is a new pattern that I came up with. It's called Twisting Stars, and it is a paper piece block, but it's really, really simple to paper piece. I've made the waist very little, and I've made the method very simple and easy and fun to do. I have 4 different combinations of colors. I have the purple, the teal, the green, and the blue. And then your main fabric is this piece right here, which will also be the binding and the cornerstones. It's just, you can do it with just 2 colors. My friend is doing it in red, white, and blue, and it's coming out beautiful. But you could just do whatever you want. I've also got a table runner with just red and greens, which we'll show you in a minute. Okay, so this is the pattern right here. I've given you the fabric requirements and your papers that you need. You can do this with regular foundation paper pieces, or you can do it with freezer paper, which is the method that I choose. The differences between sewing on the paper and sewing next to the fold of the paper is that you never have to tear the paper off from your pieces. The other reason is if you make a mistake, you can just peel the paper back and you can go ahead and take the stitches out and redo it. You don't have to rip the paper at all. Let's get rid of this cat. Now that I've gotten rid of the cat, the other reasons that you can reuse the freezer paper pieces, which is wonderful. I did the quilt that I just showed you with just 2 sets of 4 papers, and I think it's just great because I don't have to waste that much paper either. So the ways I do the freezer paper is here. There's 2 different ways I've done it in the pattern, and I've given you that you can do it with regular paper, 11.5 by 11 sheets of freezer paper that you can buy at your quilt shop, or Amazon, I'm sure has it. And that's one way of doing it, and then you can use those, or I just buy rolls of freezer paper at the grocery store. It's just Reynolds freezer paper, and it actually even says on the box for quilting or applique. I cut my pieces here. I cut them, what I've said here is 6.5 by 12, so 6.5 by 12, and then I stapled my master on top of the freezer paper stack. You have your master right there on the last page of your pattern. I recommend that you would make a copy of this so that you would have one that you're not cutting up or sewing through. What I do then is I staple it onto the freezer paper, and now I sewed right through this one, and this one. These 3 lines that are the inside of the freezer, or inside of your pattern, you don't need to sew are on the outside edge. I know that some machines don't allow you to sew without thread in the machines. My machine is like one of those too, but there is options in your settings. I went to my settings and it allowed me to turn off that alarm that says that I have no thread in the needle. So I was able to sew through those. Now I will going to go ahead and I'm just going to cut this out with my rotary cutter and have it ready for you. So now that I've just took 2 staples out of the pack, and I'm going to leave the other 4 in there, the other 4 pages in there. So I'm going to just take the last 4 pages off. 1, 2, 3, 4, and leave the others there so they're nice and tight and straight for me. And so these are your papers. What I would recommend when you first start is to number the pieces that I have. You don't have to number the sizes and everything, but this is number 1 here, this is number 2 here, this is number 3 there, and this is number 4 here. Remember that this is reversed. When you're putting the freezer paper on, you want to make sure that your master on top of the freezer paper, that all of the plastic side are down, all the right paper side is up. So now we'll be able to start with our paper foundation piecing by knowing what order we need to go in. I know a lot of my students don't like to waste fabric, so I've tried to minimize the waste on this pattern as much as possible. I was able to take the main print and you take your pieces and you lay them on top of each other, and you're cutting from corner to corner so that we have the pieces that are needed for that, which is right here on piece 1. Piece number 2 is our 4.5 by 6, and that's right here, and we're going to measure in 1 inch. Now that these were right side up, both of these last two are wrong side up. You want to make sure you do them wrong side up so you don't waste the fabric. So now we're going to measure in 1 inch in, and you can take a pencil and you can mark it 1 inch in on both ends, or I just use my mat, and it's not that critical that it be perfect. And I'm just going to go 1 inch from there. This is a 1/2 inch here, so it would go in 1/2 there. And so I'm just going to lay these down here to there, and I'm going to cut right there. So now that gives me the 2 pieces that I need, or the 4 pieces that I need for each of the 4 blocks for one. That piece is right here, right there. So now what we're going to do, what I like to do, and the other piece is the same here. So I have mine already cut, but if they were laying here, you could see these are going in 1/2 inch. So it's just 1/2 inch there to 1/2 inch here, wrong side up. And so those will be our accents. Okay. What I found is easiest for me is to take all of these to the sewing machine. And I like to take these and I put both of these 2 pieces, which are, let me grab my paper here and show you. So both of these pieces are right here. So I know those are going to be the first 2 that I sew together. So why not just do them all one right after the other in my machine? You line up the outside edge and the top, and we're just going to sew across. And so we're going to do all 4 of those real quick here so you can see.
All right.
So I'm just going to line those up, and I'm just going to sew these together, one right after the other. So now that I have all 4 of these sewn together, I'm going to press them. And I would press them just as I would if they were on the paper. I'm going to take and I'm going to press these so that the seam goes to the piece number 2. So let's take these to my iron and let's do that. So this is just like that and like this, and just get all 4 of them all ready to go. While I've got the iron here, you want to take all of your freezer paper pieces and iron them to a surface like this to remove the shininess, because the presser foot wants to stick to that. And so I found if you just, the second time I used them, that I didn't have a problem. So now I just do it before I get started. So now we are able to take this piece, fold it between 1 and 2. You've got your perforated line there so we know where the piece is. I put the number 1 piece down. I place it so that it's at least a little over 1/4 inch right here. And it lines up to that seam that I just sewed. Put that over. And now I will just take and press this, get that out there, right down to the paper, to fabric. Just like that. Now I'm going to fold back between 1 and 3, and I'm going to trim that now to 1/4 inch and add the number 3 piece. I'm going to trim that. And now I'll take the 5 by 5.5 background piece using the 5-inch area. I'm going to place this on here. You will know that you've got the right size end because this is covered. If I try to do this one here, this would not be covered. So you want to make sure that you do it this way. And now I'm going to sew right next to the freezer paper. Not on the freezer paper, but right next to that fold of the paper. Okay, and now we take them, and I do all 4 of them at the same time, but right now I'll just do the one. So now we're going to take this over to the iron. And you want to take this piece and fold it back. Don't get the iron on the freezer paper if possible. And then turn it over and press the paper down to the fabric. And there we're ready to go to the next piece, which is number 4, which is our main accent. On this block, we are doing 2 of the dark red here and 2 of the light red. So those are our 4 pieces that will go in there. And so now I'm just going to take my @1/4 ruler, your regular ruler, it doesn't matter. You don't have to have an @1/4, but sure is nice. Trim that away. And now I will go ahead and put this one down. And I line this paper that's folded back is what I'm going to be making sure is covered. And so I just line that up. I'm a little bit lower than the top, and I'm covered fully down here at the bottom. So let's do that up just a tad. Okay, and now I'm going to again sew right next to the paper. Get out of there. Just like that. And we fold the paper out. And we're going to fold the fabric over and iron it down to that freezer paper. And then turn it over and put the iron to the freezer paper to hold it down. That is how you make each piece. Now I'm going to take and I'm going to cut it right next to the paper because I've already added my 1/4 inch on the master here. So I've already added the 1/4 inch all the way around, and I didn't even need a stitch on that. So I'm going to just now trim this out and trim each of the 3 sides. And that is your waist. That's all the waist. I couldn't figure out how to cut that one piece without making a template for it, but that basically is the waist of all of that pattern. So now when you're done, you can just take this and get my fingers to work, and you just pull this right off there, and your paper's ready to be used again, and you've got your piece without having to pull all those little pieces of paper out. So I'm going to go ahead and finish the next 3 rather, and I'll be back with you. You want to make sure you don't use a wool mat for pressing these the freezer paper down. When you iron the freezer paper down to a wool mat, it picks up all the little tiny little pieces from the mat, and you don't need that because that will take away some of the use that you'll be able to use on your patterns. So I'm just using a piece of fabric to cover my wool mat so that I can lay these pieces down now. So I will lay this piece down. Again, I fold between 1 and 2, place it right there next to the seam by a little more than 1/4 inch away from this edge here, fold it over, and then I can iron these down. So now I'm ready to go ahead, fold back my piece on number 3 and trim it to 1/4 inch. I can do all of those at the same time this way. There we go. One thing I forgot to mention is when you're pressing these, I try to press it out first, and that you must put the iron to the freezer paper to make the iron kind of adheres that plastic coating to your fabric. It doesn't hurt anything, but if you don't put the iron to the freezer paper, it doesn't stick as well. Okay, so now that I have all 4 of them sewn, I want to take a paper off. I just want to show you again just the reason I like the freezer paper method, because it is just so easy to take off your paper. And then I can use those again. I used them 10 times each on the quilt that I made that I showed you. Okay, so I've laid out my 4 blocks. It's really easy to get these mixed up when you're trying to sew them together. So what I always do is I take my lightest shade and go out, and I put the darkest one on top, and then I can just sew straight down. And again, this one goes out and this one goes down, the darkest one on top. That way, when you sew them together, you don't have anything that's half and half. There's a pressing that I want to show too. Okay, you would normally think that we would press to the long piece because there's a seam on the other side. But what happens when you do that is you get this really heavy bulk down here. So the directions are going to tell you to press to the other piece. Press away from the long one, and they'll all go in a circle when we're done. Now I'll sew these two together, and then I'll spin that center seam, and I'll show you how to do that. Okay, so in order to make the center seam spin, you just take these little stitches right here that cross over that crossover seam there, and then do the same thing on the other side. Just pull these stitches down or take them out. Come on, get out of there. And that one down there too. One more, like that. Now when we take and press again to this piece, that center is going to lay flat, just like that, and you don't have that extra bulk in the center. So there's our finished block, all finished, ready to go with my sashing for a 4-star table runner.